what would it take? What type of evidence would you accept as contrary evidence? In other words, what could Augustine say? This is a sign of Jesus, and that would convince you that he's not a believer in transubstantiation.
Well, absolutely not. For instance, Augustine uses the word figura as well as spiritualem, the terms for figure or symbol. Some use symbol for figura and spiritualem for spiritual, and neither one of them do I believe, and I would argue my point, constitute something in the modern English term of figurative or symbolic in the modern English type of word. So regardless of whether he would use those terms, I think as even patristic scholar J.N.D. Kelly would point out, they do not in and of themselves prove that Augustine did not believe in the real presence of Christ as I'm arguing he did, in the manner in which I'm arguing he did. Excuse me.
You know, the real presence is one question. And
I mean in the manner in which I'm arguing. That's what I meant. Yeah. Apologize for that.
Okay.
Clarifying.
Yeah, no problem. So let me check on the amount of time we have left here.
4 minutes. We have a good amount of time.
Thanks. Okay, so in Tractate 50 on John,
could you read that, please?
It says, it may be also understood in this way: the poor you will always have with you, but me you will not have always. The good may take it also as addressed to themselves, but not so as to be any source of anxiety, for he was speaking of his bodily presence. Now, with that, the idea that he doesn't have a bodily presence, would that be enough to persuade you that he didn't hold to the doctrine of transubstantiation?
Not at all, it wouldn't, because I don't have enough time to go into all of it, because I don't want to abuse the time. But I believe in it, when the totality of the quote is shown, if I'm looking in the correct location, we see that Augustine he's not touching upon the Eucharist, but he's saying that when Christ ascends into heaven, that he will be depriving them of his bodily presence due to that. And he later affirms the continued divine presence of Christ on earth, regardless of this absence due to his ascension. So I would argue that he's saying that Christ is not still on earth in the exact way he was before. The form in which he is present is different, but nevertheless his divine presence continues. So I don't think that is a... Excuse me. Okay.
You said the form of his presence is different?
I think absolutely. I believe that Augustine is basically telling us that he's later affirming the continued divine presence of Christ on earth, regardless of this absence due to his ascension. So I believe that Augustine is saying that even though Christ is not still on earth, I believe Augustine is saying that Christ is still not here on earth in the exact way that he was before. The form in which he is present is different, but nevertheless his divine presence continues. I believe that is what Augustine is speaking of.
Does the doctrine of transubstantiation teach that Christ is bodily present here on earth?
Absolutely. But I think it's also important to point out that Augustine is not speaking of the Eucharist in this verse.
He's not speaking of the Eucharist in
the verse in the context he brought up. That is correct. Okay,
so when he says, but what means the not always, and what the always? If thou art good, if thou belongst to the body represented by Peter, thou hast Christ both now and hereafter, now by faith, by sign, by the sacrament of baptism, by the bread and wine of the altar. Thou hast Christ now, but thou wilt have him always. For when thou hast gone hence, thou wilt come to him, who said to the robber, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. That's from section 12. If you want to know the citation, immediately before, basically 2 sentences before this part about bodily presence. So you're saying, but nevertheless, he's excluding bodily presence in the transubstantiated host.
In the relevant passage in which he quoted, in which he's saying that Christ will no longer be with them in the same manner that he was before, he is not touching upon the Eucharist. Yes, I definitely arguing that. Okay. He's not even expounding upon a verse from the Gospel of John which deals with the Eucharist.
Do you think that John 6 deals with the Eucharist?
I think John 6, towards the middle of 44, 45, does deal with the strict literal interpretation of the Eucharist. That is correct, yes. Not all of John 6. I want to be clear on that.
When Jesus says he's the bread of life, should we take that literally?
Absolutely.
So he's literally bread. He has the substance of bread.
Oh, I believe in transubstantiation, so of course I would definitely argue that Christ is the bread of life. I mean, of course, as you pointed out, this isn't a debate on transubstantiation, the doctrine in and of itself, but I definitely do believe that Christ is the bread of life. I believe that literally.
He has the substance of bread. Just to clarify my question.
No, not at all. When Christ says that he is the bread of life, of course, the way a Catholic and an Orthodox Christian would take such a saying, they would believe that Christ is basically the bread that you see in front of you. That is Jesus Christ. Of course, through the doctrine of transubstantiation, it is no longer bread, but merely an appearance, but it becomes Christ. So a Catholic and an Orthodox Christian can definitely say that they do believe literally that Christ is the bread of life. We don't say that piece of bread that we're looking at is just bread. We believe that it becomes the body and the blood of Christ.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry for running a little over there. If
no
need
problem.
additional time on yours, feel free.
No problem. All right, thanks.